Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. The universe is vast, ancient, and exceedingly dangerous. To survive it, most species evolved impenetrable armor, lethal venom, or claws capable of rending solid titanium. Humanity evolved none of those things. We arrived on the galactic stage bare-skinned and fragile, quickly classified as a helpless Tier 1 race. But the galaxy fundamentally misunderstood what it takes to survive on a world without natural weapons. Devin Brinson sat near the back of the massive amphitheater, deliberately blending into the deep shadows. He was 22 years old, a first-year student at the prestigious Xylar Interplanetary Academy, and the only human within a 300-light-year radius. The Academy was the pinnacle of galactic education, a training ground for the elite offspring of over 300 apex species. In this overwhelming environment, Devin was an anomaly. He was soft flesh and brittle bone adrift in a suffocating sea of heavy chitin, interlocking scales, and engineered cybernetics. The classroom was a sensory assault. To his right sat a towering arthropod from the hives of Morzan, its mandibles constantly scraping against the metallic desk. To his left, an amorphous entity floated within an anti-gravity sphere, radiating a sharp smell akin to burning copper and synthetic ammonia. The artificial gravity of the room was tuned slightly higher than the Earth standard. It dragged heavily at Devin's limbs, enforcing a sluggish rhythm to his every movement. He preferred it this way. Moving slowly meant moving quietly. He kept his head lowered, projecting an aura of complete insignificance. On his left wrist rested a bulky, silver medical bracelet. The Academy administration had insisted upon it during his enrollment, believing it strictly necessary to stabilize a fragile human heart rate against shifting atmospheric pressures. Devin never corrected their assumption. The heavy bracelet hummed faintly, providing a constant, artificial vibration against his pulse. In the collective eyes of the galactic community, humanity was little more than a cosmic joke. They were a pathetic Tier 1 species that had stumbled into faster-than-light travel by sheer accident, lacking natural defenses, lacking any discernible predatory instincts. Humans were largely relegated to clerical duties and low-level diplomatic paper-pushing. They were considered useful for filing treaties, but entirely harmless in a physical confrontation. Devin played the part perfectly. He did not speak out of turn. He did not challenge the highly aggressive students who routinely bumped into him in the corridors. He simply watched, his dark, calm eyes recording every detail with the detached isolation of a ghost. The amphitheater shuddered as Professor Vale entered. Vale was a reptilian of the Draconid caste, standing nearly 9 feet tall, his thick emerald scales shimmering beneath the harsh instructional lights. He exuded an air of supreme arrogance, a natural byproduct of belonging to a revered Tier 4 species. 2 heavy hover drones trailed close behind him, laboriously towing a massive containment unit into the center of the sunken lecture floor. The unit was a dense cage of shimmering blue energy fields, powered by a loudly humming central core. "Settle down," Professor Vale hissed, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the metal flooring. "Today, we examine the absolute pinnacle of biological lethality, the Nyx Stalker." A collective murmur of genuine unease rippled through the massive classroom. Even the heavily armored students shifted nervously. Inside the containment field, a shadow moved. It was incredibly difficult to perceive, acting as a void of absolute darkness that seemed to actively absorb the ambient light. The creature had no discernible eyes, only a sleek, hyper-muscular form designed for zero-friction movement. It was a native of a localized death world, documented as an emotionless killing machine, completely immune to standard laser fire. Its stealth speed was legendary, supposedly capable of disemboweling a squad of fully armed mercenaries before they could even register a threat. Devon quietly observed the shadowed creature from his high vantage point. His expression remained utterly blank, his breathing perfectly even. The medical bracelet on his wrist pulsed, maintaining its steady, rhythmic lie to the Academy's monitoring network. "Observe the perfection of our containment," Professor Vale boasted loudly, confidently tapping the shimmering blue force field with a heavy claw. "The Xylar energy matrix is entirely impenetrable. You are perfectly safe in my classroom. Superior technology always triumphs over primal savagery." Devon leaned forward, just a fraction of an inch. The enclosed classroom was heavily filled with the overwhelming sense of alien fear pheromones and the damp reptilian musk of the professor. But beneath that thick layer of sensory noise, Devon's sensitive ears picked up a decidedly different sound. It was a high-pitched, straining whine, followed immediately by a faint, erratic clicking beneath the containment unit's reinforced floor panel. He narrowed his eyes slightly, tracking the subtle, rapid shifts in the blue energy field. The lower left quadrant of the cage was fluctuating, the solid blue light fading rapidly to a sickly purple. Devon raised his hand, the movement slow and deliberate. "Professor Vale," Devon said, his voice quiet, lacking the booming resonance of his alien classmates. "The primary cooling system on the containment matrix is overloading." Professor Vale stopped his arrogant pacing and glared up at the back rows. His slitted yellow eyes zeroed in on Devon. "A human attempting to lecture me on advanced Xylar engineering. How immensely amusing. Your primitive species struggles to comprehend basic warp mechanics. Mr. Brinson, do not interrupt my advanced lecture with your nervous Tier 1 paranoia." "The thermal exhaust vents are internally obstructed," Devon said softly, completely ignoring the public insult. "The pressure is actively building in the lower energy array. The containment field is going to collapse." Vale let out a sharp, barking laugh. "The system is utterly flawless. Sit down and remain silent, little mammal." Devon did not argue. He offered a small nod, slowly withdrew his hand, and settled deeply back into his seat. He looked down at the humming energy field, calmly watching the unstable purple hue spread like a toxic bruise across the transparent containment matrix. He calculated the structural degradation rate in his head. He had perhaps 60 seconds until total failure. Devon calmly reached across his own body, his fingers lightly brushing against the secure metal clasp of his medical bracelet. The crowded classroom around him remained entirely oblivious, comfortably bathed in the false security of superior alien technology, blissfully unaware that the thin, shimmering blue line separating them from a violent massacre was already beginning to fracture. The purple bruise on the energy field violently ruptured. A sharp crack echoed, loud as a cannon shot, then darkness. The humming cord died instantly. Total containment failure. A roar tore through the sudden silence. It was not a sound produced by air and vocal cords. It was a physical shockwave of pure predatory malice that vibrated right through the bone marrow. Every reinforced glass pane in the vast amphitheater shattered simultaneously. A devastating shower of deadly synthetic shards rained down on the class. The shadow moved. It was a blur of absolute night, faster than the alien eye could track. Panic erupted. It was instantaneous, violent, and absolute. The elite offspring of the galaxy completely broke. The towering arthropods from Morzan scrambled blindly over the instructional desks, their heavy, chitinous legs slipping and thrashing wildly on the smooth floor. The armored reptilians, supposedly fearless warriors from savage bloodlines, trampled each other in a desperate, mindless stampede toward the single exit archway. Survival instincts, raw and unrelenting, stripped away millennia of civilized breeding in a fraction of a second. They were prey. They knew it deep in their genetic code. The two heavy hover drones immediately deployed their lethal stun weapons. The Nick Stalker did not even bother to slow down. It hit the first drone like a freight train of solid, unstoppable muscle. Reinforced metallic armor crumpled like wet paper. A single, unseen maw snapped shut with the force of a hydraulic press. Both security drones were ripped entirely apart in one fluid. Devastating motion. Blinding sparks showered indiscriminately over the tiered seating. The acrid stench of burning lithium violently filled the air, mixing with the overwhelming scent of alien terror. Professor Vale stumbled awkwardly backward. His immense 9-foot frame crashed heavily against the unyielding permacrete wall. His emerald scales, previously a shining symbol of immense pride, flushed a pale, terrified yellow. He raised a trembling, useless claw. The stalker cornered him instantly. The beast crouched low, its muscles coiling like high-tension springs beneath its void-like skin. Sizzling saliva dripped from invisible fangs, hissing aggressively as it melted right through the thick floor plating. No one stopped to help the professor. No one dared to even look back. The exit archway was completely jammed with a writhing, hysterical mass of screaming aliens, tearing at each other to escape. Vale shut his slitted eyes tightly, desperately bracing for the inevitable, agonizing tear of flesh. Footsteps sounded. Soft, deliberate, entirely out of place in the chaos. Devon stepped out from the shadowed upper tiers. He walked calmly down the central aisle, moving directly and purposefully into the active kill zone. He did not run. He did not draw a concealed weapon. He simply walked, placing his fragile body perfectly between the towering, terrified professor and the apex killer of the cosmos. The stalker paused. Its featureless head snapped toward this new, utterly insignificant obstruction. Devon raised his left arm. He did not take a defensive fighting stance. Instead, his fingers lightly caught the secure metal clasp of his medical bracelet. With a sharp, practiced flick of his wrist, he unfastened it. The heavy silver band fell away. It struck the metal floor with a dull clatter. The artificial, stabilizing hum died instantly. The advanced monitoring network in the ceiling immediately registered a catastrophic, impossible change in the human student. His heart rate did not spike with adrenaline. It did not race in terror. It plummeted. It dropped down, 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 settling into a rhythm so terrifyingly slow, so preternaturally calm, it barely registered on the medical scanners. 40 beats per minute. 35, 30. The Nick Stalker shrieked, deeply insulted by the absolute lack of prey fear. It launched itself forward, a lethal blur of shadow aimed straight to tear out Devon's throat. Devon did not flinch. He did not retreat a single millimeter. When the monstrous beast was exactly half a meter away, Devon snapped his head up. He locked his unblinking gaze directly into the empty void where the creature's eyes should be. Devon's pupils violently constricted. It was not a physical blow. It was an explosive shockwave of pure, unadulterated biological pressure. It rolled off the young human in thick, suffocating waves of ancient, predatory dominance. It was the awakened genetic memory of a species that had ruthlessly hunted mammoths on frozen, dying tundras with nothing but sharpened rocks and endless, exhausted endurance. It was the terrifying aura of the ultimate pursuit predator, a relentless creature that did not kill with a venom or claws, but with an inescapable psychological inevitability. The Nick Stalker slammed face first into that invisible wall of dominance. It froze completely in midair. Its lethal momentum died unnaturally, dropping it heavily and clumsily to the floor right at the tips of Devon's worn leather boots. The beast was trembling. The emotionless, unstoppable killing machine from a localized death world was violently shaking. Its hyper-muscular frame spasmed helplessly under the crushing, suffocating weight of the human's unbroken stare. Devon did not move a single muscle. He simply stood there, a frail, unarmored mammal, looking down at the galaxy's apex predator with eyes infinitely colder than the freezing void of deep space. A sound escaped the stalker. It was a pathetic, high-pitched whine, the unmistakable sound of absolute, unconditional submission. Slowly, agonizingly, the terrifying creature lowered its sleek head, pressing its unseen snout completely flat against the melted floorboards. It did not break eye contact, because it fundamentally did not dare to look away from the master. Trembling violently, the beast began to shuffle backward, one agonizing, shameful inch at a time. It dragged its belly across the ruined floor, desperately retreating from the terrifying human. It backed all the way into the smoking remains of the shattered containment cage. Once inside, it curled itself tightly into a miserable, pathetic ball, hiding its head beneath its front limbs, shaking uncontrollably in the dark. The hysterical screaming at the exit had completely stopped. The vast amphitheater descended into a suffocating, dead silence. The heavy, ragged breathing of 300 terrified aliens echoed softly in the ruined room. Every single eye in the space, from the multifaceted compound eyes of the arthropods to the slitted, terrified pupils of the reptilians, was permanently locked onto the center of the floor. They stared in absolute, uncomprehending horror at Devon. He stood completely still amid the destruction, his hands relaxed loosely at his sides, breathing in a slow, perfectly steady rhythm. The frailest, weakest, most insignificant creature in the known universe had just brought a living nightmare to heal without lifting a single finger. The heavy silence stretched on, thick and heavy with the sudden, terrifying realization that the entire galaxy had made a catastrophic miscalculation about humanity. The arrest was immediate, silent, and flawlessly executed. Before the echo of the beast's whimper had faded from the lecture hall, the Academy's supreme security forces swarmed the room. Devon was roughly seized. Heavy nullification cuffs slapped onto his wrists, and a blackout hood violently pulled over his head. Behind him, the systematic neural scrubbing of 300 students had already begun. Standard protocol to erase any memory of a Tier 1 anomaly breaking the established galactic order. Devon sat entirely still in the center of the interrogation room. The space was a perfect cube of stark white, devoid of shadows, corners, or warmth. It was sterile, smelling faintly of ozone and industrial bleach. For precisely 3 hours, no one had entered. It was a classic isolation tactic, designed to break a suspect's psychological endurance by leaving them alone with their own mounting terror. Devon found the quiet mildly relaxing. The seamless wall slid open. Commander Kalian stepped inside. He belonged to a highly advanced avian humanoid species, his features sharp, predatory, and completely unreadable. His dark feathers were tightly bound beneath a crisp, black military uniform adorned with silver rank insignia. He carried no datapad, no recording devices, only an aura of absolute, crushing authority. We have scanned your biology right down to the subatomic level, Mr. Brinson. Kalen began, his voice a smooth, dangerous whisper that perfectly masked a lethal intent. Every nerve, every organ, every drop of your primitive red blood. I expected to find an illegal neural emitter implanted in your cerebral cortex. I expected to find a smuggled telepathic disruptor woven into your bone marrow. Using black market mind manipulation weaponry inside the Academy is a crime punishable by immediate execution. Devon blinked slowly, letting a mask of wide-eyed, exhausted confusion slip onto his face. Weaponry, Commander? I am from Earth. We do not even possess the technology to synthesize commercial gravity drives, let alone neural disruptors. I just stared at it. Kalen stepped closer, leaning heavily over the smooth metal table, his sharp eyes boring into the young human. Do not insult my intelligence. A native Death World apex predator does not cower before a fragile Tier 1 mammal because of a stare. It is biologically impossible. It is a psychological deterrence technique, Devon replied, keeping his tone carefully defensive, perfectly mimicking an intimidated alien exchange student. It is a basic survival trick back home. If you encounter a sun bear in the wild, you make yourself look large, hold your ground, and maintain direct eye contact. It confuses their predatory instincts. I simply panicked and tried it on the Nick stalker. I got extremely lucky. Kalen did not blink. He slowly reached out and tapped a sequence on the metal table. A holographic display flared into existence between them, bathing Devon's face in a pale, ghostly blue light. It was not a weapon scan. It was a comparative physiological analysis. Your biological scans show zero synthetic anomalies, Kalen stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. No weapons, no devices, just organic matter. But the atmospheric sensors in the amphitheater recorded a massive, sudden spike in unseen biological pressure radiating directly from your exact coordinates. The beast did not malfunction. It reacted with a deeply ingrained physiological panic response. Kalen leaned even closer, lowering his voice to a chilling, paranoid murmur. The beast recognized a superior threat. It submitted because its genetic code calculated that it was looking into the eyes of a creature occupying a significantly higher rung on the cosmic food chain. The question is, how does a supposedly weak, unarmed diplomat from a backwater dirt planet generate the biological pressure of a galactic apex predator? Devon maintained his perfectly confused expression, offering absolutely no answer, letting the heavy silence stretch tightly between them. He knew any denial would only feed the commander's paranoia. Of course, Kalen continued, suddenly shifting his posture. That is not the only mystery we are dealing with today. He swiped a long, taloned finger through the hologram, changing the display to the security feed from the lecture hall. The containment matrix did not fail due to a mechanical error. My analysts found a localized disruption code forcibly injected into the cooling system's external bypass. Devon watched the silent footage of the cage flickering violently from blue to purple. Someone wanted Professor Vale dead, Kalen said, watching Devon's micro-expressions closely. Someone intentionally sabotaged a Tier 4 containment field and orchestrated a massacre, knowing it would look like a tragic, unfortunate accident. You stepping in front of the beast ruined a very expensive, very precise assassination plot. Before Devon could formulate a suitably naive response, the sealed interrogation room door hissed open violently. I demand to see my citizen immediately! A frantic, breathless voice echoed down the sterile corridor. The Earth ambassador practically threw himself into the room, his fine silk suit terribly wrinkled, his forehead coated in a heavy sheen of terrified sweat. He looked every inch the cowardly, desperate representative of a weak species completely out of his depth. Commander Kalen, I humbly beg your absolute forgiveness. The ambassador wrung his hands together frantically, bowing repeatedly in a display of total, pathetic submission. This is a catastrophic misunderstanding. Devon is deeply unwell. He suffers from a severe, congenital neurological disorder. It is a terrible evolutionary defect in his bloodline. The bracelet you confiscated is not a gravity compensator. It is a highly concentrated chemical inhibitor designed to suppress his violent neural seizures. Kalen stood up straight, his face an emotionless mask, though his sharp eyes meticulously tracked every single drop of sweat on the ambassador's brow. A seizure that miraculously pacifies a death-world killer? It is an unpredictable electrical storm in his fragile brain, the ambassador babbled hysterically, quickly stepping between Kalen and Devon like a desperate mother shielding a wounded child. The raw frequency must have accidentally disrupted the creature's highly sensitive sensory organs. It was a pure, statistical fluke. 1 in a trillion. Please, I beg you, allow me to take the boy back to Earth immediately. He is a diplomatic liability. He needs proper medical containment in his own atmosphere. not a prison cell. The performance was absolutely flawless. The ambassador's panic was so deeply authentic, it practically radiated from his pores, filling the sterile room with the scent of human fear. But beneath the table, out of Kalen's direct line of sight, Devon noticed the tiny, rhythmic tap of the older man's thumb against his tailored trouser leg. A silent, steady Morse code signal telling Devon to stay quiet and play along. Kalen looked from the sweating ambassador to the seemingly exhausted, terrified human boy sitting silently at the table. The commander was a creature of intense logic, forged in the fires of deep, galactic paranoia. A Tier 1 species did not accidentally pacify a monster. And diplomats did not sweat quite that heavily, unless they were desperately trying to cover up something massive. "Request denied," Kalen declared coldly, sharply cutting off the ambassador's frantic apologies. "Mr. Brinson is now a vital, primary witness to an active assassination attempt on a high-ranking academic official. Furthermore, his supposed neurological condition poses a unique, potentially dangerous security variable to the Academy." The ambassador's face completely drained of color. "Commander, please, you cannot keep him here. It violates the Treaty of the Outer Rim." "I am not keeping him in the cell," Kalen replied smoothly, though the threat beneath his crisp words was absolute and unyielding. For his own safety, and to properly monitor his so-called medical condition, Mr. Brinson is being placed under strict, indefinite house arrest. He will be transferred immediately to Sector 4. The ambassador actually choked on his own breath, a gasp of genuine terror finally breaking through his carefully constructed mask of cowardice. Devon kept his expression entirely blank, though his strategic mind began racing at a terrifying speed. Sector 4 was not a residential wing for students. It was the Academy's maximum security research division, a heavily guarded, heavily classified black site where the most dangerous biological anomalies in the galaxy were studied, dissected, and eventually weaponized. "Mr. Brinson will remain under my complete jurisdiction until my specialist can determine exactly what kind of defect his brain possesses," Kalen finished, signaling the heavily armed guards waiting directly outside the door. "And exactly what kind of species humanity truly is." Sector 4 was not a prison. It was a mausoleum of genetic secrets, buried miles beneath the shining ivory towers of the Academy. The subterranean facility was a labyrinth of shadowed corridors, damp stone walls, and thrumming life support vats. The air down here was heavy, chilled to a precise temperature, and smelled faintly of preserved biological specimens. The Gothic architecture of the upper campus gave way to raw, brutalist industrial piping and massive cables that pulsed with stolen energy. Devon was granted limited mobility within a heavily monitored quarantine block. The Academy administrators believed they were safely studying him, but he was silently studying them. By quietly observing the encrypted data streams flowing through the transparent fiber optic conduits lining the stone walls, he unraveled the terrible truth about Xylar Academy. It was never truly an educational institution. It was a massive, galactic eugenics laboratory. The ruling council used the prestigious school to secretly analyze the DNA of the most powerful species in the universe, subtly manipulating their genetic code over generations. They bred forced compliance into the apex predators and ruthlessly pruned away any undesirable evolutionary traits that could threaten the established political order. Wandering the cold halls under the guise of listless pacing, Devon eventually found himself standing before a high-security containment hold. Behind a wall of solid, foot-thick glass steel sat the very same Nick Stalker from the lecture hall. It was no longer a terrifying blur of shadow. It lay on the cold metal floor, heavily chained to a heavy durasteel anchor. As Devon approached the reinforced glass, the beast did not lash out. It did not bare its invisible fangs. Instead, it slowly raised its sleek head and crawled forward, gently pressing its smooth, featureless snout against the transparent barrier. It was entirely docile. Devon pressed his own bare hand against the opposite side of the glass. He focused his hyper-attuned senses, shutting out the monotonous hum of the ventilation fans. He noticed a strange, rhythmic rippling beneath the creature's void-like skin. It was not shivering from the cold air. The stalker was communicating through highly complex micro-muscle tremors. It was a biological frequency completely undetectable to heavily armored species, but deeply familiar to the ancient, dormant hunting instincts of a human. Long ago, human hunters survived by subconsciously reading the microscopic twitches of their prey to anticipate a fleeing movement. Devon instinctively isolated the rhythm. He subtly tightened the muscles in his own forearm, mirroring the precise frequency of the vibration, sending a silent wave of dominant energy back through the heavy glass. The beast let out a soft, purring vibration in response. It recognized him not just as a superior threat, but as the unquestioned alpha of the pack. This silent communion provided Devon with a massive tactical advantage. The beast's highly sensitive hearing picked up hushed whispers from the security guards stationed 2 levels above, and it relayed the rhythmic syllables down to Devon through the glass. Combined with the fractured data logs he had memorized from the wall conduits, a horrifying conspiracy finally took shape in his mind. The containment failure in Professor Vale's classroom was entirely orchestrated by a radical, xenophobic syndicate known as Red Dawn. This extremist faction had deeply infiltrated the highest echelons of the Academy's elite security forces. Their ultimate target was the Grand Duke of the Lyra star system, a highly influential political figure scheduled to arrive at the Academy in exactly 2 days for the Grand Gala celebration. Red Dawn intended to violently assassinate the Duke and cleverly frame a rival planetary coalition, a strategic move mathematically guaranteed to ignite an apocalyptic galactic war. Professor Vale had recently discovered major discrepancies in the Academy's genetic supply shipments. He had unknowingly gathered hard evidence of Red Dawn's illegal smuggling routes. That was exactly why his classroom had been targeted. He was meant to be the first casualty of their grand design, permanently silenced by a wild beast to cover their treacherous tracks. Devon retreated to his sparse quarantine cell. He sat on the edge of his steel cot and pressed his knuckles against the primary water pipe running vertically through the cold stone wall. Using the dense acoustic properties of the plumbing, he tapped out a rapid, old Earth Morse code sequence. It was a rudimentary communication method completely ignored by advanced alien surveillance systems, which were entirely too busy scanning for digital encrypted frequencies to notice a man lightly knocking on a pipe, miles above, resting nervously in the opulent diplomatic wing. The Earth ambassador felt the rhythmic vibrations through his own suite fixtures. He tapped his response back down the long line. Stay hidden. Humanity is not ready to show its hand to the galaxy. The ambassador's order was absolute. The ongoing safety of Earth depended entirely on maintaining their pathetic, harmless facade. But as Devon sat in the dark, processing the final, chilling piece of intelligence he had gathered from the subterranean data streams, a cold resolve settled over him. Red Dawn had not just smuggled one single beast. The digital loading manifests indicated that a massive shipment labeled as exotic biological specimens had arrived that very morning. 10 more Nick stalkers were currently hidden deep within the Academy's lowest levels, starved, enraged, and fully prepared to be unleashed directly into the heavily crowded grand ballroom during the upcoming gala. Thousands of innocent diplomats, students, and the Grand Duke himself would be butchered in a matter of minutes. Devon looked down at his bare left wrist. The skin, where the heavy medical bracelet used to rest, felt incredibly light. He closed his eyes, his breathing slowing down to a terrifyingly calm, predatory rhythm. The galaxy believed they were the invincible masters of creation, completely blind to the true monsters hiding in their own shadows. If humanity remained hidden now, The entire universe would burn. Devon opened his eyes. He made his final decision. He would not sit in the dark and wait for the slaughter to begin. He was going to the grand gala, and he was going to show the arrogance of the galaxy exactly why humans were the most dangerous creatures in the night. The Zenith Pavilion hung suspended in the frictionless void of space, a glittering architectural jewel tethered to the main academy by a single, transparent atmospheric bridge. Inside, the Grand Hall was a breathtaking monument to galactic excess and supreme arrogance. Cascading fountains of liquid gold illuminated the sweeping, crystalline staircases. Above, a massive dome skylight offered a totally unobstructed view of the swirling, violent cosmic nebula outside. Thousands of the most powerful delegates in the universe gathered beneath the starlight. They wore elegant silks spun from stardust, heavy jeweled armor, and ceremonial robes that dragged loudly across the pristine marble floors. At the center of this opulent display stood the Grand Duke of the Lyra system, a majestic, four-armed luminary radiating immense political power and untouchable privilege. Devon stood near the grand entrance, heavily flanked by two imposing security operatives. He was not an honored guest tonight. He was a political prop. Commander Kalen had ordered him brought to the gala, dragging the young human out of Sector 4 to serve as a living, breathing testament to the Academy's absolute control over all biological anomalies. Devon's wrists were bound tight by a heavy pair of solid titanium restraint cuffs. Kalen paraded him before the nervous planetary ambassadors, pointing to the supposedly frail, helpless Tier 1 mammal as definitive proof that the earlier incident was nothing more than a minor, thoroughly contained fluke. The elite crowd looked at the human with a mixture of polite disgust and amused pity, completely secure in their towering, heavily armored superiority. Then, the brilliant golden lights died. The Zenith Pavilion plunged instantly into absolute, pitch-black darkness. A collective gasp of indignation rippled through the thousands of nobles, quickly followed by annoyed murmurs. But the annoyance vanished a second later. The artificial gravity generators choked, fluctuating wildly. Heavy crystal goblets, silver serving trays, and expensive delicacies floated weightlessly into the freezing air for 2 terrifying seconds before the gravity violently slammed back down, shattering glass and bone indiscriminately against the hard marble. A sound tore through the elegant, ruined hall. It was not a single roar. It was a terrifying chorus of primal, starved hunger echoing directly from the massive, atmospheric ventilation shafts circling the high dome ceiling. The thick metallic grates violently burst outward, raining heavy shrapnel down upon the screaming crowd. 10 massive shadows dropped down onto the glittering floor. 10 Nyx stalkers. The slaughter began instantly, and it was devastatingly absolute. It was a horrifying, chaotic symphony of aristocratic screams and tearing flesh. The Grand Duke's elite royal guard, clad in the absolute finest ceremonial armor money could buy, completely failed to even draw their advanced plasma blades. They were brutally ripped into bloody ribbons in less than 5 seconds. The stalkers moved like hungry, invisible ghosts through the darkness, completely ignoring the useless, panicked laser fire from the few armed security forces. The thin, polite veneer of high galactic civilization instantly melted away under the crushing weight of primitive terror. Dignified, ancient diplomats shrieked like terrified infants. They violently shoved each other down, brutally trampling their own political allies in a desperate, pathetic rush toward the sealed blast doors. Blood quickly pooled across the pristine marble. Slick, hot and black in the dim, flashing emergency lighting, high above the frantic, screaming bloodbath, a single bright spotlight suddenly activated, piercing the gloom to illuminate the sweeping upper balcony. Commander Kalen stood perfectly still, his dark feathers smoothed back, his crisp uniform completely immaculate. A cruel, triumphant smile stretched widely across his avian features. He looked down at the horrifying massacre with deep, unblinking satisfaction. He was not the Academy's noble defender. He was the violent architect of its destruction. Kalen raised a commanding hand, signaling the beasts. The pack immediately ceased their random, chaotic slaughter. They turned their eyeless faces toward the center of the room, slowly converging on the terrified Grand Duke, who lay hopelessly trapped and sobbing beneath the crushed bodies of his own failed protectors. Devon remained standing in the exact center of the chaotic hall. The panicked, stampeding crowd had completely parted around him, leaving him totally isolated in the center of the carnage. The heavy titanium cuffs dug sharply into his bruised wrists. He watched the 10 blood-crazed predators silently stalk toward the Lyran noble, their invisible maws dripping with fresh gore. The human knew exactly what was happening. A single, dominant stare could forcefully pacify a lone, startled animal in a quiet, controlled room. It was an entirely different matter to stop a massive, coordinated pack completely intoxicated by the rich, hot scent of fresh slaughter. Psychological pressure alone would simply bounce off their hyper-aroused, frenzied state. To command these beasts tonight, he could not merely act like a superior predator. He had to physically prove it. He had to finally show the arrogant, dying galaxy the terrifying, suppressed truth about his species. Humanities did not survive the savage, ancient wilderness of Earth by merely looking intimidating. They survived by hunting monsters until the monsters were entirely gone. They survived by possessing muscles densely packed with fast twitch fibers, a heavily reinforced skeletal structure designed to endure massive kinetic impacts, and a biological endocrine system that could synthesize pure, explosive adrenaline on command. Devon closed his eyes and finally dropped the heavy, exhausting mental walls he had carefully maintained since his arrival at the Academy. He took one deep, expanding breath, pulling the coppery scent of alien blood deep into his lungs. His heart rate, artificially depressed and hidden for months, suddenly skyrocketed. It hammered violently against his ribs like a heavy war drum. He felt the pure, primal heat of his own volatile blood violently flooding his veins, overriding every single civilized instinct. Devon raised his bound arms directly in front of his chest. The solid titanium cuffs were heavily forged to securely hold beings with 10 times his presumed physical strength. Up on the balcony, Kalen casually glanced down at the lone human, offering a mocking, dismissive scoff at the boy's apparent panic. Devon locked his jaw. He planted his worn boots firmly onto the blood-slicked marble. He deliberately engaged every single dormant muscle fiber in his arms, his broad shoulders, and his heavy chest, with a sudden explosive burst of purely savage, unadulterated human strength. Devon violently jerked his arms completely outward in opposite directions. The solid metal shrieked in protest. The thick titanium chain links violently deformed, stretching agonizingly for one impossible fraction of a second before snapping completely in half with the deafening, echoing sound of a cannon shot. Heavy, twisted metal fragments exploded outward, clattering wildly against the marble floor. Kalen loudly gasped, his confident, arrogant smile instantly vanishing, replaced by wide, uncomprehending shock. Devon slowly lowered his freed, heavily bruised wrists. He rolled his massive shoulders, the joints popping loudly in the sudden quiet, as he finally turned his cold, predatory gaze to face the advancing pack. Devon did not flee. He planted his boots into the slick marble and inhaled the heavy, metallic air. He reached deep into the ancient, buried core of his genetic memory, unlocking the primal savage that civilized humanity had spent millennia trying to chain. He threw his head back and unleashed a deafening, terrifying roar. It was a raw, visceral sound that echoed with the ghosts of 100,000 brutal hunts across the freezing ice ages of Earth. It was the battle cry of the apex pursuit predator, a sound that promised absolute, inescapable death. Instantly, a heavy, suffocating wave of human predatory pheromones exploded outward, flooding the vast pavilion. It was an acidic, dominant scent that completely overpowered the rich stench of alien blood and terror. The chemical signal was impossible to ignore. It slammed into the highly attuned olfactory receptors of the 10 frenzied beasts like a physical shockwave. The charging pack violently slammed on their biological brakes. Their massive, hypermuscular frames skidded wildly across the ruined floor, tearing deep grooves into the marble to stop their own lethal momentum. They stopped mere inches from the Grand Duke. The chaotic frenzy of the slaughter evaporated in a single heartbeat. Under the crushing, apocalyptic biological pressure radiating from the solitary human, their pack mentality shattered and instantly restructured itself. Devon did not raise a fist to fight the terrifying monsters. He did not need to. He simply shifted his posture, locking his knees, squaring his broad shoulders, and tilting his chin upward. He spoke the universal, ancient language of sheer physical dominance. He stared down the pack leader, his pupils constricted to tiny, freezing pinpricks. He claimed the absolute top of the food chain, and the universe submitted. The 10 beasts let out a simultaneous, trembling whine. They lowered their sleek, invisible heads, pressing their bellies low to the ground in absolute subservience. Devon raised his right hand, a gesture of quiet, terrifying control, and pointed a single finger directly upward at the illuminated balcony. The pack turned completely against their former masters. With a terrifying, synchronized shriek, the 10 shadowy predators launched themselves vertically into the air. They cleared the sweeping staircases in single bounds, scaling the golden pillars with impossible speed. The elite Red Dawn mercenaries, stationed on the upper levels, did not even have time to scream. The beasts tore through the heavily armed traders with surgical, devastating precision, a whirlwind of invisible teeth and shadows that painted the upper tiers dark red. Commander Kalen tried to flee, his wings snapping open in a desperate bid for the sky. But a massive stalker intercepted him mid-air. The beast clamped its unseen jaws around his crisp uniform, dragging the avian commander violently back to the ground floor. The monster tossed Kalen roughly onto the slick marble, dropping him directly at the worn leather boots of the human boy. A profound, suffocating silence fell over the Zenith Pavilion. The deafening sounds of slaughter were replaced entirely by the soft, rhythmic panting of the 10 deadly predators. Devon stood perfectly calm in the exact center of the ruined hall, entirely untouched, without a single scratch on his fragile skin. Around him, the 10 most feared killing machines in the galaxy sat obediently, waiting for his next command. Beyond the circle of beasts, an impossible sight unfolded. Thousands of the most majestic, powerful representatives of the greatest species in the galaxy were on the floor. Towering reptilians, heavily armored arthropods, and proud nobles were trembling violently, their bodies involuntarily kneeling, forced downward by the overwhelming, instinctual suppression radiating from the human. From the dark edges of the room, a figure stepped carefully over the debris. It was the Earth Ambassador. He no longer looked terrified. He no longer sweated or wrung his hands. He stood tall, adjusting his fine silk tie, his face carved with a deep, weary resignation. He looked around the ruined pavilion, meeting the terrified eyes of the surviving alien elites. "We designed those heavy inhibitor bracelets," the ambassador said, his voice echoing cleanly through the massive, silent hall. "Not to protect human beings from the harshness of the vast universe. We designed them to protect the vast universe from our own predatory instincts. We are not weak scholars. We are not fragile diplomats. Earth is a planet of innate apex predators. We conquered our own deadly world not with venom or armor, but with endless patience, unbreakable endurance, and a boundless capacity for violence. We hid our fangs because we wanted peace. The revelation hung heavy in the cold air, fundamentally reshaping the galactic order in a matter of seconds. The immediate crisis was resolved, without another drop of blood spilled. The Grand Duke's life was spared. The Red Dawn conspiracy was violently dismantled, entirely preventing the catastrophic interstellar war they had planned. By the very next morning, every single galactic treaty, trade agreement, and diplomatic ranking was quietly, frantically rewritten. Humanity was permanently removed from the pathetic Tier 1 classification. They were never formally elevated to a higher tier. Instead, they were silently placed outside the system entirely. They became a myth, deeply revered and universally feared as the Shadow Guardians of the Unified Alliance. Life at the Xylar Interplanetary Academy eventually resumed its normal, prestigious rhythm, though the atmosphere had permanently shifted. The following week, Devin Brinson walked quietly down the polished central corridor toward his biology lecture. He moved slowly, deliberately, his head lowered in a familiar posture of complete insignificance. On his left wrist, a brand-new, heavy silver medical bracelet hummed its steady, artificial vibration. He offered a gentle, friendly smile as he entered the classroom and took his seat in the back row. But the grand amphitheater was completely silent. The towering arthropods and the armored reptilians sat entirely rigid at their desks. Professor Vale stood frozen at his podium. As the human boy settled in, not a single alien, student or teacher, dared to look him directly in the eye. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Z Sci-Fi stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.